I rise today in strong support of H.R. 7700, Stop Unaffordable Dishwasher Standards Act, and I thank Congressman Langworthy for leading these efforts. Instead of harnessing the abundant resources we are blessed with in this country, the Biden administration wants to lower your standard of living by telling you what appliances you can have in your home, and they want you to pay more for it. These increased efficiency standards mean Americans need to run their appliances twice as long to get the same effect, and we all know it. You run the dishwasher, you open it up, the dishes aren't clean, you've got to run it again. It happens to every American family multiple times.
So I think it's important before we legislate on something to know something about it. So I know a lot about dishwashers because I'm a single mom and I load and unload and load and unload and rinse and buy detergent. So I wonder if the gentleman who's supporting this legislation about dishwashers, proposing to be an expert in what the American people want in their dishwashers, would be willing to engage in a little colloquy with me about dishwashers. I would like to yield. Are you willing to engage in this? Representative Duncan, I'd like to know if you know what the average utility cost is a month to run a dishwasher. Nope, he doesn't know. $2 to $4 a month. In other words, about a third of a Frappuccino. $2 to $4 a month. Mr. Duncan, do you know about how much a dishwasher costs, Representative Duncan? Like a mid-range dishwasher? Nope, he doesn't know. About 800, 900, you want to get fancier, like 1,000? Representative Duncan, do you know the best ways, the most important things you can do to make your dishwasher get the dishes clean? Nope, not a dishwasher expert. Loading it correctly. Mr. Chair, do you know how long it takes to load a dish out? What the most important technique is to load a dishwasher correctly? It is loading it correctly. Can you tell me which political party proposed a budget that would cut funding for wildfire resilience?
Ma'am, it was the Republican side.
It was not the Biden administration. Their budget has these funds in it. So when we look at these pictures, like most Americans, what I feel is I feel love for our national parks and recreation lands, and I feel a desire to protect them. But apparently not House Republicans. They look at these pictures and they don't seemingly feel anything at all. They just see an opportunity to attack our national parks.
I rise today in support of H.R. 2925, the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act, offered by the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amadei. H.R. 2925 would resolve harmful permitting uncertainty and litigation delays caused by a harmful 2019 rogue court decision known as the Rosemont decision. This decision revoked a previously approved mine plan to my great state of Arizona, ignoring 40 years of federal permitting and land management regulations. Congress should act to remedy the fallout created by Rosemont and must work to expedite mine permitting and build up domestic mineral supply chains. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill that would provide much-needed certainty for domestic mining projects.
We have heard repeatedly from across the aisle that mining pollution is a thing of the past, that today's modern mining industry operates under the highest environmental standards, and that after the mining operations stop, the industry cleans up after itself. If that sounds too good to be true, it's because it is. If we're going to allow a toxic mining free-for-all, we should at least make sure that taxpayers are not footing the bill. After all, this bill opens up our lands to our foreign adversaries, and I don't expect them to clean up after themselves out of the goodness of their hearts.
Are we going to have a 21st century that's an American century or a Chinese century? So I think about the goals that this administration has stated. They've talked about American manufacturing, and I hear it from both sides. We must have American manufacturing. How are you going to have American manufacturing if you don't produce some of the minerals and the metals that come out of the ground? How are you going to have American manufacturing if we don't produce some of that in America? I hear that this administration wants to make sure that there's union labor. There's a project labor agreement that is in place to be able to build this mine. This is going to create union jobs, one of the goals of this administration. And certainly they've talked about electrification. We want to electrify our vehicle fleet, as well as getting rid of natural gas-fired stoves. How are you going to get there if you don't have the minerals that produce those devices that are going to be able to provide that?
I just heard that Republicans now support a clean energy transition. I hope people clip that, because that is wonderful, wonderful news. So I want to be the first to welcome you to the Clean Energy Transition Club, where we are going to support investments for states, municipalities, and tribal governments to purchase clean energy technology like solar panels, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, wind turbines, all of which, until today apparently, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle opposed. So what exactly is the problem here on the other side of the aisle? You are fully complying with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, a bill passed by this Republican-led House, and yet my colleagues, the Republican colleagues, are accusing, in this very committee, my Republican colleagues are accusing you of breaking the law. So, Chair Mallory, I read the rule, and it sounds like my colleagues are, to be generous, dead wrong. But I wonder why they're really upset in the first place. They're big mad. So since you're following the law, what could they be big mad about? What does SCEQ do?
We manage the Environmental Policy Act, and we advise the president and his senior advisors on environmental policy.
So you implemented a bunch of items that reflect the climate realities that we face, requiring projects, for example, to disclose greenhouse gas emissions.
Correct.
Is it possible, you can't know their motives, but is it possible that's what they're mad about? That you are doing your job to safeguard our environment? I think that's exactly what it is.
Gentlelady mentioned earlier that Republicans were not wanting to help American consumers, wanting to take money out of their pocket. This is actually the opposite of that. We're wanting to help save the American public money over time by stopping these reckless, rush to green regulations like we're voting on today, dealing with both refrigerators and dishwashers and then gas stoves, but only because they have a green agenda that really wants to do away with fossil fuels. And let's just call it what it is. That is their agenda, to end the use of fossil fuels in the United States of America. At a time when we need, as a growing nation, a growing population, growing metropolitan centers, we need more energy. The demand for energy is only going up, it's not going down. But the continued war against American-produced fossil fuels is costing Americans' ability to improve their quality of life and their standard of living. Americans know they're hurting because it started with energy. We've talked a lot about that. But Americans also see a border that's wide open and 16+ million people that have crossed our southern border that are raping and killing American citizens. Crime rates are going up in cities. They're straining our social services at the state level in our own communities, causing our property taxes to go up, our state income taxes to go up to pay for folks that aren't even legally in the United States of America, and that's because of Joe Biden's open border policies. Sure, we ought to debate a lot of things in this Congress instead of debating regulations on efficiency standards on dishwashers and gas stoves and refrigerators and freezers and all these things, but the Biden administration has definitely overreached in these areas because they have a green agenda that they're pushing.
I've heard a lot about the Biden border, the so-called border crisis. What I haven't heard about is anything about dishwashers. So as somebody who saved and scrimped and was so proud to get a new dishwasher and can tell you a lot about them, what they cost, what kinds of features they have, how to load it properly, which I wish every person, every man and child in America would listen to their wife.
gentlewoman another 2 minutes.
Would listen to their spouse about how to load the dishwasher correctly. Those are the most important things that make your dishes get clean. This bill is ridiculous. It is Congress at its worst. A bunch of people who haven't unloaded a dishwasher ever, telling the American people what legislation, what kind of dishwashers they should or should not be able to buy. On behalf of every American woman who's going to load and unload tonight and again tomorrow morning, I yield back. People love our national parks. Republicans, kids, adults. Some of our greatest national treasures are parks, not only for the natural beauty they provide, but also for the history that they preserve. Director Sams, do you know of anyone who hates the national parks? Have you encountered people like that in your service?
I have not, Madam Congresswoman, not at all.
I have not either. But sadly for all of us, our national parks have been increasingly harmed by wildfire. California has seen devastating wildfires in the last decade in our national parks. Forests have been destroyed. Wildlife has been vanquished, relocated, and historic structures have burned. And I want to show people what this looks like. These are tragic images. We should all be able to agree that these are tragic images. And we all know now, I want to be clear about this, we all understand that fires are, to a certain extent, an essential part of forest management. They're a natural part of forest management. But we want our parks to be resilient. Mr. Sams, can you tell me just yes or no, does the National Park Service have a fire resilience plan to address situations like this?
Yes, we do.
You do. Of course you do. Of course you do, because everyone loves the national parks and nobody wants to see these kinds of harms. Mr. Sams, what's the one big thing that Congress can do to help aid wildfire resilience? When we see these images, when our constituents see these images, what do they need their representatives to do?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Additional resources. The national
Money. Let me just stop you right there, because I'm going to ask you what you're going to do with the money in just a minute, but I want to be really clear. Money. They don't need us suiting up and showing up trying to fight the fire. Social media posts don't put out wildfires or replant forests. They need money. Congress can provide the resources. Now, fortunately, last Congress, thanks to Democrats and President Biden, we passed two laws, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and there were Republicans who supported that, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Each law invests $5 billion into federal wildland fire management. This is because, just like I said, people love parks, and we want them to be open. Mr. Sams, how is the money that you said you need and that Congress has allocated, how are you using that to restore national parks that have been harmed by wildfires?
Thank you, Congresswoman. We've been allocated $105 million from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law for fuels reduction and post-fire restoration and rehabilitation activities that will mitigate the damaging effects of the wildfires and set landscapes on a path towards natural recovery and climate resilience. This includes planting of native and non-native species to restore or establish healthy, stable ecosystems and reestablishing burned habitat and reestablishing native trees lost in the fire.
So you're putting these dollars to great use. You've led a major effort to restore, for example, historic sequoia trees in the Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park in California that burned in 2020 and 2021. I've been there myself, unable repeatedly to visit Kings Canyon because it is still being affected by fire and storms. How exactly does investing in these efforts promote wildfire resilience? So you've talked about kind of repairing and restoring, but how about making things more resilient?
The funding helps us really look at how we're moving forward in the face of climate change. What are the species of plants that were out there? In my own experience in working with tribes and understanding indigenous knowledge and how we've used that, we as American Indians have seen climate change over the last 30,000 years happen at least 3, if not 4 times. And we have enough knowledge and understanding of what we can do to help build a more resilient future.
So can you continue to do this work without the $105.3 million? Can you do this just by waving a wand? Is there a way to do this without spending money?
Absolutely not. We need the funding in order to be able to combat this issue.
When we cut funding, we are hurting parents who have saved all year to take their kids or grandkids camping. We are devastating our recreation economies, and we're putting lives at risk. fully funding the National Park Service and BLM, protecting those investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law, it is critical to the survival of our parks. I yield back. Our current regulations require companies to post financial assurances to cover the cost of cleanup after their mining operations stop. But it is not enough. Dangerous pollution still happens far too often. Depending on the mine type and location, between 74 and 82% of modern-day mines are polluting beyond what their permits allow. And the kicker? Taxpayers pay domestic and foreign mining companies for their subsidies and often the entire cost of cleanup. Given the $54 billion backlog to clean up mines abandoned before our current reclamation regulations, which continue to pollute our lands, waters, and communities, the American taxpayer literally cannot afford new mining pollution. That's why I filed an amendment to this bill to improve bonding requirements and make mining companies keep up with the new mining rush that this bill would enable. So my amendment would make sure operators post financial assurances to fully cover reclamation of all mining activities. It would correct for inconsistencies in both BLM and Forest Service regulations and codify those corrections into law. And it would have made sure these financial assurances were real money, like surety bonds, irrevocable letters of credit, certificates of deposit, or cash, not insurance policies that lapse if the mining company goes bankrupt. It is time we hold industry accountable and make sure they cannot pass on the costs of cleaning up after themselves, the costs of their earning profits, onto the American people. But guess what? The Republican majority refused to even consider my amendment. They blocked it from getting a debate on the House floor and even from getting a simple up or down vote. It's outrageous, and it paints a dark picture of the House Republicans' priorities: polluters over people and China over the American taxpayer. I yield back. One of the many permitting reform bills, we've voted on so many, but one of the many ones that we voted on actually became law, and it directly affects your agency. Chair Mallory, do you know what bill that is?
Fiscal Responsibility Act.
Correct, the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So that bill raised the debt ceiling. What did it do exactly under your purview?
Thank you so much. The bill included a number of permitting efficiencies. It basically directed us to have specific deadlines. It directed us page limits on the environmental impact statements and environmental assessments. It required us to have a lead agency for the environmental review process who's coordinating with various other cooperating agencies and provided some definitions there. It included categorical exclusions and a sharing of categorical exclusions across agencies, among other things.
When I listen to you, what I hear you describing is a permitting reform passed by this Congress, by this Republican-led Congress, focused on efficiency, clarity, being able to deliver a more clear, efficient process so that we can move major environmental projects through the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, in a clear and successful way. So the rule fully implements the Fiscal Responsibility Act.
Yes.
So it's so weird to me that so many of my Republican colleagues have accused CEQ of not implementing NEPA reforms as passed in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I want to try to understand, is it accurate that the final rule promulgated, the Phase 2 rule, reflects the changes made to NEPA?
100%.
So, for instance, as you mentioned, the rule makes agencies condense environmental assessments into a single document.
Correct.
If they wanted to, if Republicans wanted to, they could have limited CEQ's role in protecting the environment. They could have done that in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. They could have put in place a different set of rules for permitting reform and for NEPA in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But they didn't. They put in exactly what they did. You did exactly what the law directed you to, and then they're big mad. So, and now they're lying to the American people by making false allegations about you and how you lead your agency. So I would have hoped if there were an issue about actual compliance with the law. We could have had a meaningful discussion rooted in facts, but in this committee, we don't. Because frankly, my Republican colleagues are trying to blame you rather than themselves. And I guess it's just easier for them that way. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 3195, the Superior National Forest Restoration Act of 2024. The district I am proud to represent, Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, is blessed with an abundance of mineral wealth that would allow America to lead in the 21st century. The deposits in northern Minnesota could provide enough copper for over 70 million electric vehicles and nickel for 3.5 million battery packs. The Duluth Complex and its abundant resources lies under the Superior National Forest and throughout the Iron Range. The Superior National Forest is a working industrial forest where timber harvesting and mining are desirable activities. Regrettably, in January 2022, the Biden administration caved to radical anti-jobs, anti-mining activists by canceling 2 decades-old mineral leases held by Twin Metals Minnesota in the Superior National Forest. At the same time, the Biden administration began the withdrawal process on nearly 250,000 acres of land in the region. They are disregarding years of environmental review, a pending mine plan of operation, and an abundance of support from union workers, local residents, schools, builders, and miners. In doing this, President Biden has made his real position on mining known. He would rather rely on foreign adversaries like Communist China instead of union workers who stand ready to deliver Minnesota's mineral wealth under the strongest environmental and labor standards in the world.
Mr. Speaker, welcome back to the show. Unlimited drilling and extinction of wildlife, brought to you by the GOP, a subsidiary of Big Oil. This week's target, the Boundary Waters in northeastern Minnesota, a pristine wilderness that is in fact the most visited designated wilderness area in our country. And it's the most visited for a good reason. Its beautiful landscapes, crystal clear waters, and abundant wildlife make it a haven for outdoor recreation. The Boundary Waters support a thriving outdoor recreation economy with hundreds of thousands of annual visitors and tens of thousands of jobs across northeastern Minnesota. In fact, the Boundary Waters is so popular that an overwhelming majority of Minnesota voters oppose building new mines near this federally protected wilderness. But this region and its resources, our resources, have been under threat for years and are being threatened again today. In 1966, the Bureau of Land Management issued 2 mineral leases covering 5,000 acres of the Superior National Forest just outside of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. There was never mining on either lease. Never mining. Yet they were renewed in 1989 and again in 2004. In 2012, Twin Metals Minnesota, a wholly owned subsidiary of a Chilean mining company, requested another extension of those 2 expired leases on Forest Service land in the Boundary Waters watershed to build a sulfide ore copper mine. In 2016, after an extensive environmental review process, which included public input and scientific analysis, the Forest Service concluded that sulfide ore copper mining, which is significantly different from the taconite mining that the region is used to, could result in, and I quote, extreme and serious and irreparable harm in the watershed of this wilderness area. The watershed there flows north, meaning it would flow past the mine and into our protected wilderness. The Forest Service found that any spills, leaks, or pollution would be all but impossible to contain, putting the entire ecosystem and watershed at risk. This should have been the answer: no to this sulfide ore copper mine. Because that's what the scientists say, that's what the community wants, and that is what the law means, that a wilderness area is protected from severe harm. But foreign companies wanting to mine and the politicians who answer to them were too enticed. As soon as President Trump came into office, his administration ignored the science and community input and reinstated Twin Metals leases. The Department of Interior solicitor under the current administration found that President Trump improperly renewed those leases. Thankfully, after another thorough review and rounds of community input and tribal consultation, the Biden administration finalized 20-year protections for 225,000 acres around the wilderness area, making that area ineligible for mining. But this bill seeks to undo all of that. This bill would mandate the withdrawal be overturned and the leases be reinstated and no judicial review allowed. This means that it will not matter if the water and air become poisoned and the surrounding tribes and communities become severely ill. No one will be able to take those concerns to a judge and ask that they revisit the decision to mine in the boundary waters. You'll hear today that Americans have to choose between mining for minerals to secure our clean energy future or protecting the health of our families and vulnerable ecosystems. That is simply not the case. We all understand the need for mining as part of our clean energy future. But America is already a top producer of copper and is already invested in a circular economy with our trusted trading partners for cobalt and for nickel. So if we're going to build a sustainable, enduring, modern mining industry, we have to do that while respecting sound science and community input, including tribal consultation. Look, I deeply respect the workers and their families who mine, and the way that that tradition has contributed to the backbone of industrial America. But they live and work in locations where mining is appropriate, where there is minimal to no harm to the environment or human health. Unfortunately, this bill disregards all of that and seeks to destroy now and deal with the ramifications, not later, not at all. I oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Let us be very clear about what this bill actually does. This bill does not reduce any environmental protections. It simply tells the Secretary of the Interior to do her job and complete the necessary environmental and regulatory reviews. Apparently, President Biden and congressional Democrats are so opposed to mining here in America that they won't even allow a company to prove that they can mine in an environmentally safe way. By opposing this bill, Democrats are allowing mines with unregulated labor practices and environmental standards to control the critical minerals market. Republicans are for American jobs, economic security, supply chain security, and protecting the environment by mining here in the United States, where we have more environmental protections than anywhere else in the world.
We are hearing a lot about America and America's mineral supplies. But what we're not hearing about is the truth about Antofagasta, the Chilean mining company who is pursuing these leases. At Antofagasta's mines in South America, the minerals are shipped to China for refining and smelting and then sold on the global market. I have seen no evidence, because there is no evidence, that Antofagasta won't do the exact same thing here, extracting our publicly owned minerals from pristine wilderness, paying no royalty for them, and then selling them abroad, leaving Americans with all of the mess and no benefit. So much for America first. I also want to talk about the environmental effects of this mining. Sulfide ore copper mining, that's what we're talking about. Not iron mining, not taconite iron mining, sulfide ore copper mining. That's what's being proposed outside of the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area. And that sulfide ore copper mining poses a unique threat. It is different than taconite iron ore mining. What happens in sulfide ore copper mining is the ore that contains the ore that's extracted contains metals that are bound together with sulfur. When exposed to air and water, this sulfide-bearing ore discharges acid mine drainage into the ground and surface water. The waste rocks, the tailings from this mine would generate acid mine drainage for hundreds of years, at least. And just so everyone knows, these facts aren't hyperbole. This is available information studied and reported by scientists, with some who have published their findings on the dangers of sulfide ore copper mining at universities, including the University of Minnesota. Proponents of this mine say that their tailing facilities would be safe from leakage. We hear that every time about every environmental extraction proposal. But the facts are clear here. The Forest Service found that 100% of sulfide ore copper mines in the United States experienced pipeline spills or accidental releases. All of them. So it is a near certainty that that is what will happen, that we will have a pipeline spill, we will have an accidental release, we will have irreparable, severe environmental damage if this sulfide ore copper mine is allowed to occur on this Forest Service land. It would infect and pollute the boundary waters, and we would be unable to reclaim our beautiful, pristine wilderness.
This is going to create union jobs, one of the goals of this administration. And certainly they've talked about electrification. We want to electrify our vehicle fleet, as well as getting rid of natural gas-fired stoves. How are you going to get there if you don't have the minerals that produce those devices that are going to be able to provide that? Because remember, in every Toyota Prius, there's 60 pounds of copper. 60 pounds of copper. How are you going to electrify the vehicle fleet without producing minerals right here in America? And I think back to January 20th of 2021 and the very first action that this administration took in saying they're going to shut down Keystone XL, making it very clear we're going to be energy dependent once again. What immediately happened to the price of oil? It went from $60 a barrel. Within a couple months, it was up to $100 a barrel, enriching the despot, Vladimir Putin, who has used it to wage war in Eastern Europe. That's what happens when we do not utilize our natural resources, whether it's our forest resources, our mineral resources, or our oil and natural gas resources. We end up being dependent on other countries.
So as the newest members of the Clean Energy Transition Club, I want to give my colleagues on the other side of the aisle a brief lesson on where the U.S. stands with mineral production and trade, which is needed for the construction of clean energy technology, as my colleagues have correctly pointed out. First, the United States is among the top 5 producers of copper in the world, and according to the U.S. Geological Survey, has a low disruption potential. Second, while we do not in the United States have a significant amount of nickel or cobalt, we do have close trading relationships with our allies who do. Those allies are Canada, which is a leading supply of nickel, Norway, Japan, and Finland. But let's talk about what twin mine metals would produce. If this project by this Chilean-owned mining company was allowed to go forward, mine and pollute our wilderness, ship the ore and the jobs to China, and sell it anywhere around the world, what would it complete? Even if they were to sell all of it to us, and there is no guarantee they would choose to sell any of it here in the United States, it would produce about 1.5% of cobalt. about 2.3% of copper, about 3.6% of nickel, according to 2019 annual consumptions, the most recent figures I could find. So I want to emphasize, there is no guarantee that the minerals produced at this proposed twin metal mine would wind up back here in the United States. But do you know what we absolutely are guaranteed to end up with? Pollution, contamination, the destruction of beloved wilderness lands. That's what's at stake here. I also want to emphasize that the bill, H.R. 3195, would undo the withdrawal of 225,000 acres in the Superior National Forest. And what that would do is, in removing these lands from the protection from mining, what it would do is violate the will of indigenous communities. In this case, the Boundary Waters and Superior National Forest are traditionally known as the Anishinaabe land. The Ojibwe or Chippewa people have occupied this area since 1000 CE. The region's interconnected waterways have been used as critical trade routes for thousands of years. By the 1830s, the United States government began forcibly removing indigenous people from their lands in the upper Midwest. In exchange for millions of acres of land, the government promised to pay the Ojibwe people $35,000 each year for 20 years. And the tribes were also granted the right to hunt, fish, and gather on those ceded lands. In 1848, copper was discovered along the north shore of Lake Superior. Mining companies pressured the government to open the land to mining, which required another land cession, including what would become the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area. So the tribes had to sue. In 1985 and 1989, they won confirmation of the tribe's right to hunt, fish, and gather on those ceded lands, something that had been previously denied. To further protect these treaty rights, the Minnesota Chippewa tribe supported the administration's withdrawal, and they support my colleague, Representative McCollum's bill to permanently protect this region from mining. Because of their support for permanent protections, the tribe has faced boycotts from mining-aligned interest groups who have boycotted their casinos, event venues, and restaurants. That is a ridiculous and cruel response to a tribe that is simply trying to protect its ancestral lands and waters from toxic pollution. To add insult to injury, this bill restricts judicial review of the reinstatement of leases, a blatant attack on treaty rights. The U.S. government deciding on permits without allowing the tribes to address their concerns in court is an egregious overreach of legislation in general, but also of particular concern to tribal governments who would be directly affected but unable to address their concerns in the only legal means that they currently have. Mr. Speaker, I would like unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe in support of permanent protection for the Boundary Waters.
Mr. Speaker, my colleague just referenced a study that was not peer-reviewed. It was the Harvard study she brought forward that was not peer-reviewed. And I would like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
I want to start by noting that the Harvard study was, in fact, peer-reviewed. And as a former professor, I am very familiar with the peer review process. It is a reliable study, and what it shows is that what is best for the economy of this region is to protect these public lands and waters. Let me ask, what is the value of clean water? Water is also a valuable resource. It is also a resource in scarce supply around the country. If this bill moves forward, it would allow for the irreversible pollution of this pristine and incredibly valuable landscape. Remember, the Forest Service concluded after scientific study that there is a virtual certainty of severe and irreparable economic harm. All 100% of the sulfide ore copper mines in this country have had leakages and environmental contamination. That is what will happen here. This will mean the decimation of local economies that depend on visitation. This is the most visited wilderness area in our country. It belongs to the people of the United States. It does not belong and should not belong to a Chilean mining company, which under our outdated mining laws will pay no royalty at all to the American people. If the U.S. wants to reduce our demand for copper, which is increasing, then we should invest in recycling, in reuse, in manufacturing improvements. That would create jobs domestically and not risk special places like the Boundary Waters. When this water, if this mine proceeds, and if this water is contaminated and destroyed, there is no known remediation strategy. It cannot be undone. The U.S. Forest Service has conducted an environmental review. They have consulted with communities, they have consulted with tribal members, and they have relied on cutting-edge science, and they have concluded that these mines should not go forward. The science is done here. It just doesn't line up with the answer of my colleagues' donors. I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Chair, I want to reiterate the fact to the American people. There will be no mining in the Boundary Waters, and there will be no mining in the buffer zone around the Boundary Waters. That was settled in 1978.
The Boundary Waters are not a bathtub. The water flows from one place into the other. And in this case, the watershed flows north, meaning it would flow past the mine and into the protected wilderness. My colleague on the other side of the aisle says there would be no mining in the Boundary Waters, but there would be waste, there would be pollution in those waters because of the watershed. This is exactly why we should rely on the scientific process and the conclusion of the Forest Service that this mining would cause severe and irreparable harm. I have heard no rebuttal from the other side of the aisle to the fact that every sulfide ore copper mine in our country has, 100% of them, had leakages and environmental harm.
The gentlelady is recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have been having hearings, markups, and floor votes on this issue for years. Administrations have canceled and reinstated these leases and then canceled them again. The Biden administration, unlike the previous administration, took the time and effort to do the process right. And they came to the considered decision, based on science, to cancel the wrongly reinstated leases and to protect the Boundary Waters region for the next 20 years. That decision is not just based on sound science. It also is based on community input, robust tribal consultation, and at the end of the day, on the best interests of the American people, because that is who these public lands belong to. That is who should benefit from these public lands. But a foreign company and politicians who bend to their interests don't like it. And as I've made clear in this Congress, their priority is not putting science first or protecting communities. Their priority is putting corporate polluters' profits above all else by any means necessary. My Republican colleagues say that the toxic mining industry needs certainty. Well, this is certainty. The Boundary Waters watershed is off limits. I welcome the opportunity to work across the aisle to reform the mining law. For example, to require royalty payments. That way we can build a sustainable future for the industry. But that part of the conversation, support of mining, needs to recognize that some places are too special and too risky, and some types of mining are too risky to do. Because at the end of the day, who would you choose? Your child's health? Our lands? Wilderness? Endangered species? Tourism jobs? Our local economy? Or would you choose a foreign company who wants to mine in a location that would hurt the environment, our economy, and our health. I know what I would choose. I urge opposition to this bill, and I yield back.